Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Sports Pro podcast. I am Tom Bassam, joined remotely by a couple of my pals from the editorial team. Hello, Steve McCaskill.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Josh Sim.
Hello.
We are talking on the eve of the new Women's Super League season. The Women's Super League is not anything to do with rugby. It is, of course, the top flight of English women's club football. It's a very exciting time for the English women's game. Over the summer, we've seen the transfer of power from the FA to the Women's Professional Leagues Limited, to give it its formal title, formerly known as NewCo, and I think in the future to be known as something different too. It's all a little bit technical and not particularly exciting. But Josh, what have been the exciting developments with the WSL and its management, I guess, over the last sort of 3 to 4 months?
Yeah, well, obviously, we at Sports Pro got to hear from Nikki Doucet, who's now got a first full season as chief executive of NewCo, now known as the Women's Professional Leagues Limited, a catchy name, or the WPLL. So she's now chief executive, but she's also sort of filled out her sort of supporting team. So Holly Murdoch, who's come in as chief operations officer, Ruth Hooper as the CMO, and Zara El-Qudsi from Chelsea Women has joined as Chief Revenue Officer. So we now have sort of more people around her to sort of lead on specific aspects of the league and women's football in the UK that need to be developed further. So yeah, I think in terms of sort of building out a team and sort of now having people to put faces to and sort of understanding, you know, how and who's going to be sort of spearheading this sort of transformation that we all hope for, that's obviously a big step. It's one of the things that obviously we're going to see going forward is hopefully further steps now that they've got the people in place to sort of build out those blocks further.
I think I read somewhere that there's due to be some additional appointments on the media right sales side and on the marketing side too. Of course, those are like major areas for the WSL and really points of difference, I think, probably from when it was under the control of the FA. I mean, obviously the FA has a media rights sales process. Otherwise, we all wouldn't be able to watch the FA Cup, but it's generally more of a governing body than a commercial body. And hence why we ended up with NewCo and now WPLL running things in England. As you said, we heard from Nikki Doucet at Sports Pro Live this year, and anyone who wants to can watch Sam Karp's follow-up interview with her, which is on our LinkedIn page and YouTube, I believe. She's talked quite a lot about how she wants the WSL to be a sort of really different brand from probably what it was before, but also other leagues around the world. How do you think that this new leadership team go about doing that?
One of the things she was sort of keen to impress on us at Sports Pro Live was the idea that it had to sell itself differently to men's football and target a different audience to the men's game, be it sort of, you know, families, be it sort of maybe fans of football who haven't found a team yet or play in the men's game, but are more likely to do so in women's football. She talked about sort of that they had already done some sort of data crunching and analysis in terms of understanding their fan base. I think that's obviously one of the first big steps, and sort of then being able to, I don't know, tailor content towards those sort of people or maybe strike commercial deals that appeal to a wider audience base outside of sort of the diehard WSL fans. So I think it certainly has done its sort of preparation in terms of trying to understand who its audience is. I guess the next point is sort of pinpointing who exactly it wants to go for and, you know, making sure there's touch points and there's accessibility to welcome in new fans, be it putting more games in sort of bigger stadiums or, you know, we'll talk about media being now fully on YouTube and sort of having content there. That kind of thing is going to help it sort of, you know, find more fans and hopefully, you know, it means revenues are going to go up as a result as well.
I think continued growth is really the mantra for the WSL and the WSL Championship. It has been, I'd say, positively trending in the past few years. There's too much data to suggest otherwise. Attendances have been rising. Obviously, they had that first major rights deal with the BBC and Sky a few years ago. That was, as I think we'll come on to talk about, Steve, extended for an additional year earlier this year. So it still covers this season. We've also seen, aside from the WSL as well, just generally in Europe, we've seen more attention and effort put towards like generally the women's game. There's the growth of the Women's Champions League. It feels to me like a pretty good moment to be kind of taking this next step in the professionalization journey of the WSL. I guess the big thing, the big question mark is over that next media rights deal, Steve. What's your kind of take on where the WSL is at in that journey?
Well, I guess still the current media deal was transformative for women's football in the UK in terms of, still not a lot of money compared to the Premier League, but to have that.
It's about £8 million a year, right?
It's £8 million a year at the minute. But it's in terms of having that guaranteed coverage on Sky Sports, which is the premier pay TV service in the UK, and the BBC, which is the biggest broadcaster full stop. Having that exposure was, it's unprecedented, and it's been a really vital source of engagement and exposure for the league, and the revenue has helped as well. But of course, as we move on in the stage of the WSL's evolution with what's happening I think I'm still going to call it in UCO. WPLL sounds why isn't just WPL? That would be easier. Again, I guess we get into cricket, but I digress. But it's made a transition phase from the governance point of view. We're now in a transition phase from a media point of view. So it's basically rolled over that deal with Sky BBC for another year to give it an opportunity to find a long-term arrangement for its rights. And the suggestion is that Sky BBC are interested. Again, TNT could be interested. DAZN, which has put a lot of resource behind women's football across Europe and shows WSL and other markets, could also be interested. So I guess WSL, it's like any other property. It's got to balance the reach and revenue argument. One of the biggest challenges to WSL, of course, is it is a commercial entity. A lot of these clubs are now looking towards how they make money, not just growing the game. So how they get the revenue while also ensuring the league gets that continuous growth that we've just talked about. So I think we'll be hoping for an uplift. I think there's been an independent study which suggested rights could be worth about £15.6 million a year, which is kind of double its current arrangement. Again, not quite on the men's level, but it's growing. The most watched matches on BBC can get a million viewers, if not more. The average viewership is up double figures. So there is a demand for this product. They need to get the next one right and get more commercial momentum behind the league. But it's also worth pointing out, again, something Josh has said, it doesn't need to do what the men's game has done just because it's worked for them. And there's also issues about time slots. So there have been a suggestion that the women's game could be exempt from the 3 p.m. blackout. That feels like a Sports Pro and the Stream Time Sports podcast bingo. We should have a bell every time the 3 p.m. blackout is mentioned.
I think that's also been dismissed by Nikki Doucet recently, saying that that's no longer really an option. Speaking to Sky last year about this, they were pretty bullish on how they thought it performed as a product for them. They had a bit of a formula in terms of using their Super Sunday broadcasts in order to tee up or even bring in fans in that way. I guess the thing here that you would say is that from next season, the amount of Premier League games on Sky is going to go up. So there may be even less opportunity for the WSL to have access to those premium broadcast windows that they have been enjoying in the last few years. But yeah, Steve, as you mentioned, reach, do you think, speaking entirely just in your professional opinion rather than any kind of informed view, you can bring an informed view if you want, but do you still see free-to-air as a bit of a necessity for the WSL in terms of that next rights deal?
I certainly think it would be counterproductive to lose that exposure, particularly given that women's football often appeals to a different demographic to men's football. Obviously, there is a fair degree of overlap as well. And if you don't subscribe to a sports service, but you're interested in sport and you see there's a WSL game on a Sunday afternoon, you're more likely to watch it. I think the power of that shouldn't be underestimated. And I think there's also the auxiliary stuff around that. You've got the women's football show on BBC, which is effectively a match of the day style roundup. You've got digital platforms, so it's not just linear coverage. The BBC can do a lot for a sports property. It's one of the most available channels in the country. So I wouldn't go as far as say it's a necessity, but I can't see the logic for it would have to be a pretty good reason to lose that window and from a revenue point of view. And at this stage, we've seen it with other sports like cricket. Rugby is also slowly moving away from that free-to-air window. So we've seen what can happen to a sport, and also those sports moving away from free-to-air means there's an opportunity for women's football.
No, it's a very good point. One free-to-air option that they are going to be using, and I don't think anyone thinks of this as a replacement for free-to-air broadcast, but they've had for the last few years, the WSL games that haven't been on Sky or the BBC have been available on the FA Player, which is obviously a FA owned and operated platform. Although the FA still has I think a significant share in WSL. Probably, I imagine as well, just the logistics around that product mean that putting those games that were on there now onto YouTube instead feels like a logical move to fill in that gap and gain, like, probably not massive viewership, but just some of that additional viewership. Josh, do you think that's a positive step for the WSL?
I think so. I think it's obviously, we should also say that it's not just a WSL that's going to YouTube, but the Women's Championship games as well. And so you had on Sunday the opening game between the London City Lionesses, who now owned by Michelle Kang, play against Newcastle's women's team, who have also put in a lot of investment in their women's side. So it gives opportunities for teams that I guess wouldn't necessarily get that sort of screen time on the BBC or Sky to sort of be on YouTube and sort of allow and give fans an easy sort of way to access and find those games. It makes a lot of sense. We know that WSL fans aren't necessarily fans of the Women's Champions League, but people were used to sort of finding Women's Champions League games on YouTube for a while, with the DAZN sort of rights deal kicked off initially. So we know that it's sort of inbuilt in sort of their behavior to sort of go into YouTube and find these sort of high-level women's football games. So I can only see it as a good thing. And I think in the press release, they also said they're going to do some sort of shoulder content as well. And again, that's just another great way to sort of reach out to fans and, you know, even come across on people's feeds via, you know, the algorithm to sort of make people aware of the league and sort of offer an entry point for them.
Yeah, there's no doubt for me that YouTube is a better platform than the FA Player, having used the FA Player. It wasn't easy to navigate, and it just doesn't pop up in the same way that YouTube, you can be on it. And as you said, it can use its algorithm to promote that live content. If that's something that the WSL wants to tap into, and I'm sure they would, you can take those options and funnel people towards your live coverage, which in turn probably creates that fan, and you'd hope in turn creates the kind of fan that would maybe go and find them on Sky or the BBC or whoever the next broadcast partner is. Before we move off the WSL, there is one kind of part of this I want to talk about, and you mentioned, Josh, there, the London City Lionesses. They are one of only a handful of teams to be independently owned. Of course, they were previously attached to Millwall, but split off from them a few years ago. Now acquired by Michelle Kang. Lewis was another one, famously led by Maggie Murphy, previous speaker at Sports Pro Live, very well-known figure in the women's game. And after stepping down from her role as Lewis CEO this year, she wrote I thought it was a really interesting piece. It's available on her LinkedIn if anyone wants to go and look it up, about the rush to develop and the rush to commercialise the women's game coming at a cost to the sort of health of the game generally. We saw Reading, a troubled club, that not just on the women's side, but on the men's side as well. They had to kind of pull out of the WSL Championship. And basically what she was saying was that some of the commercial demands being placed on some of the teams, especially in the second tier, are not feasible, which kind of leads me to my question, which is, while it's great, I think, that we're seeing this professionalisation of the women's game, there needs to be some measure, I think, taken to make sure it's not happening at the expense of the health of the whole sport generally. What you don't want to end up with is a sort of a really distinct two-tier system or even a closed shop league. Josh, do you think there's sort of danger of that happening with the speed at which the WSL is developing?
Yeah, and I think there's a danger that it benefits those at the sort of upper echelon of the league, the top tier teams, at the expense of the lower teams. Deloitte put out a report in June talking about the 2022-23 season and said that the top four revenue generating clubs made up 66% of the total revenue generated by the league. You know, that's a big discrepancy between the top and the so-called bottom of the league. And even so, with the sort of the unique how the English pyramid system works, you know, that it'll create an even wider gap for the team that gets promoted into the league and sort of then, you know, needs to build a competitive team to stay in there. So I think definitely there's an issue. You know, we see that Chelsea women can routinely attract sponsors and Arsenal women can routinely attract sponsors, but it's about sort of making sure that the teams sort of at the low echelon of the table can also sort of have those commercial opportunities and are also able to generate individual revenues as well as sort of the, you know, centralized revenues that leagues provided. And there's definitely a danger that we focus a lot on sort of the top teams being able to compete with sort of the best in the NWSL or the best in Europe, but making sure that those at the bottom also have those steps and making sure that especially those that are sort of tied to men's teams are able to sort of have a sort of viable business strategy to make sure that they also grow as well in their own right, and not just sort of hamstrung to the fortunes of a club who, as a men's team, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, that Deloitte report actually that you referenced was really interesting and had some quite encouraging statistics in that the sort of aggregate revenue of the WSL clubs had risen by 50% and was up to about £40 million. Pretty decent cumulative revenues when it came to things like commercial, 17 million across the clubs. And some of the bigger names, as you would expect, Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool, Spurs, all posted commercial revenues of more than £1 million. Now, that's a Deloitte report. Those aren't club figures. There's probably some dispute to those. What I guess that does point to is that the big clubs are able, potentially, to pull away from the smaller clubs. I think one of the challenges when you go and WPL, WPLL, whichever we're going with, is to ensure that we're not left with a structure where there is just a group of clubs that are able to afford to do this or commercially streets ahead from the rest. And ultimately, that results in a lack of competitive balance. I think competitive balance has been a bit of an issue for the WSL in recent years. It does seem like there's a kind of group that can win the title, and then there's a group that battle below that. Steve, as a sort of final thought on this, what do you think is more of a priority for the people running the WSL this season? Is it ensuring that big hit in terms of growth on the commercial side from media, etc., or is it carefully managing and nurturing almost the base of the WSL pyramid, if you want to call it that?
I think it would be unwise to pursue commercial growth at the expense of everything else at this point. I think if you look at it look at other growth properties, they've taken a long-term approach. Women's football, yes, has been played for a long time, but it's not been organised to this extent for very long. I think it's the same case for things like the Women's World Cup, where FIFA all of a sudden, decided that they can make some money out of it and try to do too much too quickly. And I definitely think that the pursuit of that revenue, there was an opportunity cost in 2023 where it could have done more to expand the audience in key markets. So, of course, you want revenue growth, but you should also make sure that this sport is being watched by as many people as possible, and that commercial growth come with it. And of course, again, we keep on saying women's sport does not have to subscribe to the same models as men's sport. If it decides digital platforms, decides YouTube is the way to go, that can also increase audience. There can be new commercial opportunities there. It doesn't have to rely on this predominance on subscription media products to be a viable concern. I think the one concern perhaps I do have on that front is, we talk about different priorities of clubs. We talk about, independent clubs like the City Lionesses, which, are seen as a commercial venture in their own right. Manchester United, which, doesn't seem to be the priority for the new owners at present. And you have a club like Chelsea, whose men's team are consistently having to find new accounting measures to keep their current stress on the men's side. So they're looking for investors on the women's side, looking to spin it off. There's a lot of competing interests there. I think that's one thing I could see as an issue in terms, especially when it comes to a media deal. But yeah, I think it has to look at the long-term picture. It's been a great journey so far. Why squander those gains now? Especially when actually in a position where you set yourself up to really go for it and take the game to the next step with the move away and the split from the FA. I think you're sort of bang on there, Steve. Josh, anything else, or should we move on?
With all the challenges that still do lie ahead for the WSL, it is still an exciting time. And I know that the NWSL is obviously in its own stratosphere, but the growth there, it's exciting to sort of see what the potential is for the WSL to sort of follow in those footsteps. And we'll have all the developments on the website as usual.
Sorry to interrupt your podcast. I just wanted to give you a little nudge to check out our Sports Pro Plus Media Hub. Now, the Media Hub is packed full of features and tools to power your digital media and content strategies. It has some really interesting features such as our company profiles, media rights trackers, sector maps, and our broadcast and OTT news channel, as well as market spotlights. Now, these market spotlights are fascinating insights into some of the biggest media markets in the world, looking at the major players in that territory and the properties that matter. You can access the Media Hub with a Sports Pro Plus subscription, and right now, podcast listeners can get 10% off an annual subscription using code podcast10 at checkout. That is code podcast10 at checkout. Terms and conditions apply, and that is only available on an annual subscription. So once again, that is podcast10 at checkout. Now, I return to your regularly scheduled programming. Right. welcome back. Steve McCaskill, this is going to be an area where I feel like you can show us how big your brain is. The regional sports network picture in America has been in turmoil for, shall we say, 2 years, maybe 18 months, longer?
I think longer than that. But I'd say about maybe 3 to 4 years, although the seeds for its current turmoil were set before that.
Yeah, I remember a particularly interesting Sports Pro New York where we had speakers from Diamond Sports Group, owner of the biggest network of RSNs in the US, speaking at our event that day and then also announcing bankruptcy right at the same time. That was, I believe, March 2023. A fascinating time to be alive. But we're in a slightly different phase now. Diamond Sports Group have come out of or are emerging from said bankruptcy. And it feels like the major properties that were affected by this in the NBA and Major League Baseball are starting to view how to manage to the accelerated decline of RSNs in a different way. Do you want to expand on that a little bit for us, Steve?
Yeah, I'll do a bit of scene setting first, just without going, just like the concept of RSN is quite alien to most other countries. And basically when cable came to the US in the 80s and 90s, there was these growth of regional sports networks, which got the local rights to sports teams, matches. They signed lucrative deals for the teams on, really long-term deals, and then secured carriage deals with the cable platforms. And of course, in the US, you can't pick and choose which services you want. You pay for a bundle. The logic was that local sports were a really appealing part of this bundle. So the cable companies gave the RSNs lots of money. So it was a real win-win for everyone. The teams got money from these contracts, and the RSNs made money from cable. Now, with streaming, that sort of undermined the economics of that model a bit because fewer people are getting cable, and a lot of these RSNs don't have streaming services. So it's a double whammy in that regard. So the RSNs that used to not really have to do much in terms of marketing because people just paid for it even if they didn't want it, are now struggling with fewer subscribers, and they're struggling to get people to subscribe to their services or don't have a way to do it. Now, Bally's, owned by Diamond Sports Group, is the biggest operator in the US. It acquired these regional sports networks from Disney in, I think it was 2019. Disney acquired them from Fox, but Disney had to get rid of them due to competition regulations. If they hadn't done that, we'd be talking maybe very different things. So, but basically, long story short, Diamond Sports Group has these unsustainable contracts, doesn't have enough money coming in to cover them. Just correct you slightly, it hasn't filed for bankruptcy, it's been in bankruptcy protection, March 2023, which I think is quite an important legal distinction to make. Now, to come out of this bankruptcy protection, it's had to basically convince the courts that it has a viable business plan. To do that, it's been trying to restructure these agreements. It's got some refinancing, and the NBA and NHL have agreed basically short-term deals with Diamond Sports Group. Basically, they can continue to the end of the season. There's some additional streaming rights thrown in there as well. And then DSG gets to pay lower fees. But if it doesn't exit bankruptcy protection by the end of the season, the rights revert back to the league and they can do what they want with them. Baseball, which is probably the most reliant on these rights, has been a bit more combative in its, at least its public statements and privately. So it's perhaps not quite as willing to, it feels messed around by DSG basically. So that's kind of where we're at on that front. Warner Brothers Discovery had some RSNs, it's withdrawn from the market, and you've got team-owned ones which are doing a bit better because they can make these decisions. So that's kind of where we're at now. It's a bit of a mess. It's several media trends combining into one, but the weird thing is there's probably still a profitable business out there if people could, local rights are still a profitable thing. And so that's kind of where the industry is trying to work out. It's all kicking off basically.
It's all kicking off basically. It sort of made me, when you were talking about lots of conjoining trends, I sort of feel like this is a petri dish for experimentation on what actually a future model looks like. Well, certainly in the US anyway, when it comes to that local rights picture. We've seen a few different options, teams partnering, for example, with local free-to-air, over-the-air, as they call them in the US, networks, while providing direct-to-consumer streaming on the side, which fans can pay for and includes additional content. That seems to have emerged as one of those trends. Another is bundling together of RSNs. So we've seen this in New York with the new Gotham project, which is a sort of combination of Yes Network and MSG networks. So basically, if you're in New York, you can get all of the local sports teams in one place, which is quite a lot, probably quite a good offer if you've got $40 a month. The other one, as you said, Steve, is that team-owned option. Sort of a story that's kind of emerged from the C-suite of the NBA and the MLB this week has been an indication that actually they kind of want to follow what the NFL does, which is basically sell all of their media rights, local and national, to the partners, and then let basically the broadcasters figure it out. What exactly have the NBA and MLB been saying on this, Steve?
Well, I mean, yeah, if you're not the NFL, you rely on local broadcast revenue. The NFL is a league of its own in terms of both the size of its deal and the way, and because there's only, each team plays, I think it's 17 regular season games, every match means something. So there's national interest and it's got an outsized profile. The rest of the US major leagues, there's a lot of local appeal, which is why these RSNs exist in the first place. You're right, there's a move to perhaps centralize this, and whether you start giving local rights to your national media partners. You could kind of argue that the NBA is kind of already national level, the size of its media deals, the popularity of the league, the fact that fans will watch players as well. So you've got a lot more matches throughout the season that means something or people want to see. There's the in-season tournament. And the NBA, to create its new package, I think they've sort of taken away some of these local rights already and made new national packages out of them. So it's a process that's already happening. Now, what's happening is the RSN space is thinking, well, what if we bundle these together even further, sell them to one of the platforms? So, for example, if we get all the local rights to NBA teams, we can pitch this to ESPN, which can add local sports to the D2C version of ESPN, ESPN coming out next year. So it's all in one place. You're not reliant on the economics of RSNs. It's just a more future-proof way to deal with this. Major League Baseball, it also wants to become a more national game. It's a bit more of a challenge. I mean, MLB has got national TV deals, but they're really all over the place and not hugely valuable. ESPN has a package. The suggestion is it's going to exercise its opt-out of its current deal. It wasn't really interested in keeping Friday Night Baseball, which was picked up by Apple. And there's just so many games. There's 162 regular games a season. Not even fans of the Yankees are going to watch 162 Yankees games. I mean, there probably are people out there, let's be honest, but you know what I mean.
The Steve McCaskills of North America, I'm guessing.
Oh, I'll be watching the Mets, come on. But it's a bit of a harder sell, but the thing that happening for baseball right now is it's doing well. The rule change has been positive. It's got a group of young stars coming through that people want to watch, and it's again trying to build a bit of a national product around that, create some buzz. So it's thinking that perhaps it could also try and include its local rights with its central deals and increase the value of everything, or create a centralized stream platform for local games. It already has MLB TV, which is an out-of-market proposition, which basically means if you live in New York but you support the Dodgers, you can watch the Dodgers games in New York. Or you can watch Yankees games from LA, that sort of thing. It would like to add in-market games, so if you live in LA, you can watch Dodgers games on streaming. So it's kind of a shift. The principle of local and national broadcast remains, but it's a shift in how these rights are sold, how they're marketed, and what they mean in a world where pay TV is becoming less influential.
I think the real difference here and the difficulty for the NBA and for MLB is, as you're right, is the size of the season. For a local broadcaster in the NBA, I think it's 60 plus once you take out the national broadcast games. That's just a hell of a lot of content, and that's never going to get national appeal. But as you rightly mentioned, Steve, if you have a streaming platform where it doesn't have to worry about the cross programming and what channels things go on, because simply it's just a stream, it really adds to that level of flexibility. And it seems maybe that's the answer for these high volume leagues. Josh, one of the interesting players here is Amazon. They have been a part of a local deal in New York. I can't remember exactly the specifics of how that works, but they've also offered to work with Diamond Sports Group with those RSNs to provide carriage options via Prime Video in local markets. Steve was talking there about MLB TV. offering sort of out of market. Do you think Amazon's a viable player in this space? Like it really feels like it's stepping up as a sports broadcaster in the US with its with recent NBA deal, for example, now a national media partner, and obviously it's been with the NFL for a few seasons.
I think where Amazon probably sees the opportunity in this is to be an aggregator or sort of a one-stop shop for your NBA fans or MLB fans. So we know, in terms of the NBA, we know they're going to be a broadcast partner starting in 2025. But then being able to then go to those fans and also offer sort of a way of watching in, I guess, fans in local markets, a way to watch more games and keep them in that sort of Prime Video ecosystem. It makes a lot of sense for Amazon. And we know that they sort of are keen to sort of attract consumers and then sort of make sure they stay in this sort of ecosystem. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Amazon to sort of take an interest in sort of being a distributor of these RSNs. And yeah, it will be interesting to see what, if other broadcasters, I think ESPN may or may not have talked about sort of doing something similar, but it doesn't seem like an expensive sort of opportunity really. But the amount of time spent on the platform that could be gained from doing so makes it like a pretty good deal. And if you're those RSNs, you're, I guess those, whatever the subscription fee is, I think, posted $20 a month for the Bally Sports RSNs on Amazon Prime Video, potentially. You'll get that revenue back and you'll have a wider reach to more people. So I don't anticipate too much downsides with the idea of Amazon sort of becoming a distributor of RSN broadcasts.
I think it's definitely a good move for Amazon to bolster its portfolio. If you've got national NBA games, you've got local broadcasts as well. That's a pretty good sell for someone. I almost think there's a case, I mean, if you look at what ESPN is trying to do in a post-cable world, it's trying to get its D2C service on as many platforms as possible to replicate the scale of cable. I'm wondering if that is the model for RSNs. So if you are Bally's or if you're an independent like Yes Network or something like that, where you start to become almost platform agnostic. So you have your own service for someone who is a super fan for local sports and get everything. Then you make your games available on ESPN, you make them available via Amazon, you make them available via Roku, whoever, so you can get the games if you want to. Maybe that's the path forward. So you still get that scale that cable offers, make it affordable enough that people actually want to subscribe, and that's the way to go. Perhaps that's the way you get the reach. But yeah, I think it's a good move for Amazon. It's particularly since it's effectively almost like one of its, it's a bit more integrated, I think, one of its channel arrangements, but yeah, it feels pro-consumer anyway.
Pro-consumer, not very often the case when it comes to being a sports fan in America. I think you're probably forking out north of $1,000 a year if you wanted to follow your teams by their local broadcasters or via D2C services, and including all of the sort of out-of-market packages and stuff like that. It's a very expensive place to be a sports fan, but yeah, so I guess all of that can only be a benefit. And I think I feel like having had a murky period where we don't really know where this is going to go, it's starting to emerge what the picture is, at least in the RSN market. Steve, is that about right?
I think so. I think most teams just want certainty. And even if that means lower revenues for a period, I think they would take that, because I think you can definitely tell in baseball's case, they're just getting exasperated at the situation, not knowing what's going to happen, what rights are going to be dropped, how fans are going to get the games. If it means a loss of some short-term revenue, I think they would take it. The other thing to mention about, these local sports rights is exposure is really important for these teams. I know it sounds a bit weird in one sport, but when you have 80 plus home games a season, you want to get as many bums and seats as possible. So exposure on TV is really important. There's often crossover things. It's why baseball have all these various theme nights, like for different professions, people from different countries. It is quite important. That's why some have gone free to air. So yeah, they just want certainty. They just want this resolved, and they want to have an idea of what the future is going to look like.
Let's move on. Final talking point for this week's pod. This emerged earlier last week with a report that the ATP and WTA, so those are the elite top tier of tennis, really, the singles tours, were looking to finalise their sort of long mooted merger in the first half of 2025. I think this story is really fascinating for a couple of reasons. One is that you've had these two entities that sort of have the same interests and serve the same purpose, but have been quite independent of each other outside of a few events historically. As we were sort of talking about there with RSNs, it's a kind of a shift in the consumption of these things. They both sold their media deals independently, for example. So you might be able to watch a WTA event on one channel and have to go somewhere else to find the ATP version. A merger would probably, you'd think, align those a little bit. But there's some other interest here too. Josh, I'll come to you first on this. What are the factors you think driving this WTA ATP merger?
You can go back a little bit in terms of looking at each tour's sort of financial situation. And mainly what I mean by that is the WTA. We have reported for a bit about how it had to sort of cancel its events in China. Obviously, it was during the COVID pandemic around that time, so kind of a convenient way to do so, but they did so out of concern for Peng Shuai, the Chinese tennis player. And therefore, its sort of boycott of events in China it hit them quite hard financially, and especially as I think their season-ending event, one of their flagship events on the tour, was being held in a Chinese city at the time. So we know the WTA have been sort of trying to recover their finances. They've entered into a partnership with CBC, who have obviously investing in their commercial rights division. But yeah, the WTA obviously is still trying to sort of get its finances back up. It's also now agreed to hold its WTA finals in Saudi Arabia as well. So it definitely needs an uplift in its revenues. As for the ATP Tour, I think they've been doing a lot better. This year, their sponsorship revenue has gone up 50% from the previous year, so that's encouraging stuff for them. But I think the idea of the merger coming together would obviously enable sort of both entities to sort of sell, be it TV rights, be it data rights together, and make more money out of it, being a more attractive proposition for be it broadcasters or data companies, etc. And obviously making more revenue out of that, and then it would then be split between the two. And indications are that the men's tour would probably take a 75-25 split, would take the majority of the revenue. So I think the idea is to sort of bring together these two, again, as you said, these two independent entities, bundle up their rights together and make it more attractive for broadcasters and data rights people. And hopefully then it makes it easier for tennis fans as well. And in terms of having one place to go for tennis tour events rather than sort of having to be split all over the place.
Steve, I'm going to come to you on this. Do you think this kind of merger would be good for the consumer, would be good for the fan? Having that bit of consolidation, bringing it all together, and if it's good for the fan, is it then also good for the joint venture?
I mean, I think there's definitely been some fragmentation in terms of tennis. You know, different broadcasters having the men's and the women's tour. There's already been a bit of informal crossover. So Sky has the UK, so it's WTA and ATP rights in one place. Amazon had that before that. Before then, WTA events were on Eurosport and the men's were on Sky. And one of the reasons the Grand Slams are so popular is, of course, you know, the biggest tournaments in the sport, but also there's men's and women's games happening at the same time. So there's sort of, they lead into one another. There's a discoverability element. So I think it would definitely be good if you can get the sport you like on one subscription. You know, that goes without saying, that's a rarity in the modern landscape, really, isn't it? You know, everything seems to be getting more complicated. And for what Josh was saying about being better for things like data rights and things, it's definitely going to be, you know, can be more valuable given the tennis is quite a popular sport for betting. So there is that element to it as well. But yeah, I think it can only be a good thing for a fan, provided that they become so attracted to broadcasters that it requires an even more expensive subscription, which I know some people are a bit upset about. Again, in the UK, it's gone from Amazon to Sky, for example. But yeah, on face it makes sense.
Josh, you also briefly mentioned Saudi Arabia here. They are kind of a looming element in all of this. There was a recent report that the PIF was going to pay a large sum of money to bring a ATP Tour 1000. So that's basically the sort of the second biggest men's tournament outside of a Grand Slam to Saudi Arabia. It already has a WTA event. Similarly, there was talks earlier this year of a sort of take it or leave it offer from the PIF to kind of complete this merger. It feels to me like actually tennis is one of those sports where, kind of a bit like golf, the Saudis have an opportunity to own a sport here. Is that how you see it?
It's interesting because I guess we look at sort of what they've done with other sports. Obviously, golf, they were very keen to sort of bankroll their own sort of breakaway circuit. And create their own framework as a guest rather than sort of working within the existing golf framework. And obviously now they've agreed to merge with the PGA Tour and DP World Tour, and those talks have sort of gone on for a bit, and so we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But with tennis, it seems they're more willing to be an existing player within how the current setup works. Obviously, the big elephant in the room is I don't think anyone knows what the sort of status quo is going to be going forward, because if the tours merge, then it does change sort of how the commercial landscape looks for the PIF, and obviously they've got investment deals with and partnerships with both tours. So, I don't know if they're necessarily looking to necessarily impose themselves in the same way that we've seen with other sports, but obviously they're very keen to bring more tennis, high-level tennis to the country, be it, there was a report, I think, this week from Daniel Kaplan saying an ATP Masters 1000 event could be going there at some point soon. WTA finals, as mentioned before. So it'll be interesting to sort of see, how this merger goes ahead, what their role looks like in this, and what kind of say they're going to have going forward.
It seems to me like tennis could, a bit like boxing, actually do with someone coming in and making that kind of investment to bring it all together and make it make sense. That's just sort of my own take on it, and that's removing the human rights and controversy element from being involved with the Saudis and with the PIF. But tennis has it does have a bit of a problem in terms of that narrative between the majors. Everyone loves the majors. We've just seen the US Open conclude. I think viewership suffered a little bit, Steve, in domestically from being up against the NFL in a way that it hadn't before. But generally, the majors are in a pretty good place when it comes to their finances and interest. But outside of that, it's hard to see a narrative throughout the season. I don't think Netflix Breakpoint has been a success in the way that it was with Formula One. It definitely didn't get the engagement numbers and hasn't been renewed. With a merger, is there a chance perhaps to present a bit more of a united front and create a sort of a narrative that people can actually follow throughout a season when it comes to in between those big four events?
I think there's definitely an opportunity to sort of present with sort of the combined might of both tours to present something that is, as you say, a more easier narrative to follow for fans and stuff along the year-long calendar as well. Tennis is such a long season, and most people sort of, I feel at least a lot of casual fans either tune in for the Grand Slams and then tune out, and the tours don't run the Grand Slams, so they don't seem to get a lot of the financial pie that the Grand Slams sort of make when it comes to sort of attendance and TV rights. And so I think coming together and sort of being able to offer a joint package to broadcasters and stakeholders, I think it will make a lot of sense, and it will be a lot easier for them. And obviously, if you're a company and you're wanting to come on board as a sponsor, the idea of having your branding across both tours is a much more enticing proposition. So you're more likely, I guess you'll increase your spend, because you'll have two tours to sort of advertise across. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether this gets done, because there were reports of an alternative proposal put together by the Grand Slams that sort of has been swirling as well. And
that's the premium tour model, right?
Yes, which would mean that the Grand Slams and a select group of current tour events would form this sort of elite circuit. Yeah, it's all quite messy and confusing, I guess, if you're a tennis fan, because you don't know exactly what the landscape's going to be. And I imagine there's more twists and turns, although it appears, I think the report we're referring to that said the merger is going to happen said it would close in 2025. So, that doesn't leave too much time for everything to come together.
Yeah, it puts a bit of a clock on any other deals in the works to maybe come in and gazump what's being put together by the ATP or basically what's being put together by the existing partners. If people want to come in from the outside and do something else, then now they've got, I guess, a deadline which is 6 months long, potentially, which is, as people who work the deadline quite regularly, I'd say that's quite a generous deadline, actually. Steve, any further thoughts on this?
I mean, the only thing I'd say is I think it's almost like you could pick and choose elements of the rival plans. I think there's certainly a case for making the Masters or the 1000 tournaments bigger spectacles. It would start perhaps by calling something other than 1000 tournaments, where you perhaps you almost have independent men's and women's tournaments every layer, up to 500. You make these bigger tournaments for men and women. It seems like an easy win to combine the WTA and ATP finals immediately. Like that should just be, that's an easy win. So you've got 5 big events off the bat. Work with ITF to get Davis Cup a bit more, prominent spot in the calendar. Just make it mean something, whether, try and just clarify what these tournaments mean, in the concept of wider season. I don't know I'm not saying you should have something like the FedEx Cup playoffs in golf, but, create that postseason buzz. I just think it needs to be repackaged. I think the idea of working around a select number of premium tournaments has legs, particularly when it comes to attracting the casual fans. So, will remain to be seen, but
Yeah, I'd like to see that doubles the element to this as well. Maybe a Hopman Cup style tournament would be a nice addition. But it does feel like the current setup can't last. Probably won't. So within this 9-month window that we've got for a merger to happen, I'm sure there'll be a few more twists and turns. In which case, I'd be very happy to have you both back on the pod to talk about it. That's it, I think, for this week. Josh, Steve, thank you very much for your time and your intellect.
Cheers, Tom.
Too generous, thank you.
Well, I try. Right, cheers, guys. Sports Pro Pod will be back next week with a special from our very first Sports Pro AI event. Steve, you looking forward to it?
Oh, of course.
Couldn't sound more excited, I think. Right. He is beaming down the camera, folks, if that's any consolation.
It's going to be a brilliant event, and we hope to see as many of you there as possible. All jokes aside, it is a great lineup. And I think we're all going to learn something.
I'm certainly going to learn some stuff. Right. That's enough for this week. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.